controls internally to make sure that we don't fall into that trap, because that's what it is. It's a trap. So how can we actually use meaningful resources that we have to drive behavior of our employees and to reduce risks? So charitable donations, for instance, that's an area that's usually an area used for corruption. So we have to have the proper controls to review the entities that do receive donations of services or money. Historically, this is an area of concern, so we do that. Another excellent mitigation strategy is to have constant checkpoints with the operation, because our employees that are out there dealing with government officials or not, if government officials, if we talk about corruption as is defined by the anti-corruption law in Brazil, but if we think private bribery, that's also another concern. That's also bad business. So having those constant checkpoints with the business to have their posts on what's going on, it's really important, because then we can together adapt our internal procedures. And we actually give them this empowerment to make sure that they understand and they are able to evaluate the risks and together with us to determine whether we need more controls or not. The idea is to have it, an effective control point, not simply something to check the box, because that doesn't work. If it's just a check the box control, it's not meaningful, and we have to engage them. So we need to somehow incentivize them to act as owners of the risk. And then we can together talk about what can be done and adapt our procedures.
Okay, thank you, Patricia. I have another one for Sergio in this segment. So Sergio, in your experience, how do you identify and determine whether a company or an entity is effectively engaged in implementing its anti-corruption compliance programs?
That's a very good question. I agree. I totally agree with Patricia when she said that you cannot work on this with a checklist. Of course, there are points of the program that are mandatory, but you need to look close to the records. And usually the usual questions are the ones that the United States DOJ use in its guidance. Is the program, the compliance program, well designed? Does it have autonomy and enough resources? Is the program effective in practice? Let me add something from my experience as a judge in the car wash case. When I worked there as a judge, some of these big companies, they had compliance programs. And one kind of defense that they used before me, at least the executives, was that they had a compliance program working, and so it was impossible that the facts happened, or that they have some knowledge, or at least they use the compliance program as a way to defend themselves from any kind of personal involvement. But they usually fail to answer a very simple question. After the facts were discovered, after the federal police, for example, opened an investigation and the company was notified about that, what the company did, which kind of steps the company took to investigate all the facts and correct all the wrongdoings. Usually I didn't receive an answer for that. So if you have a compliance program that is really effective, after an incident happened, you need to have a reaction. You need to have an answer that you could, if argued by the public authorities, to present as a result of the work. Nowadays, for example, there are a lot of companies who want to invest in Latin America, to buy assets, to buy companies in the stock market. And it's very common that they ask for due diligence, not anymore only related to labor or to taxes, but also anti-bribery due diligence. And sometimes they look for companies like mine, my consulting company, and they want answers if the company has or not a strong compliance program. And when they make these answers, you need to go to the records, to specific records, and look the whole picture and try to answer that questions that for example, the DOJ stated. And one thing that's very important to see not only the report channel, but what the company did when it received any information about, or any notification about possible fraud or possible act of bribery from one of its managers or employees. So there's a long list to say to this answer, but the main point is that you need to go to the records, to the specific records.
Oh, thank you, Sergio. Now we are moving for the next block, which is private sector and civil society. Chad, I have two questions for you. Can private citizens in the US do anything to combat corruption and uphold corporate integrity involving companies in Latin America? The next question I will do after your response.
Sure. Yes, the answer to your question is yes. In the United States, private citizens can combat corruption in at least two ways. For one thing, bribery, fraud, and corruption, usually by a company, has victims. And if the victims have been damaged monetarily, amongst other things, they may be able to bring an action, a litigation, civil litigation, against a company from Latin America that engages in corruption under certain circumstances. They might be able to, for example, bring a case under the US securities laws, or the US antitrust laws, or even US racketeering laws under RICO, which are all federal claims. Or they can bring actions in state court for unfair competition violations. So there is many ways in the US you can bring actions. There also might be actions that could be brought in the courts of Latin America or other proceedings. For example, in Brazil, there might be collective arbitrations through the market arbitration chamber, for example. Now, something else that can be done is whistleblower actions involving a company employee or a third party who are aware of corruption by a Latin American company or by a global company that has offices in Latin America where corruption has happened. So either through civil litigation or whistleblower actions.
Oh, that was exactly my question. Can you expand a little bit on whistleblowing action and how are whistleblowers protected and incentivized under the US law?
Okay, there's actually a few laws, but in a whistleblower action, a company's own employee or a third party who has witnessed corruption, such as bribing a government official, actually brings it to the attention of the US government. They either give testimony, they show evidence, and if the US government prosecutes that case and recovers money in the form of sanctions or penalties, the whistleblower can get paid. For example, the US Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, has its own whistleblower program. So if a company employee goes to the SEC and the SEC goes after a company and recovers money in a penalty or a fine, the whistleblower can share in that recovery. Now, the only way the US is going to get involved is if the Latin American company does business in the United States or its securities are traded on a US stock exchange, like the New York Stock Exchange. And indeed, to illustrate this, Congress passed the Anti-Money Laundering Act of 2020 recently, and it increased incentives and protections for whistleblowers, for specifically who report money laundering or violations of the US Bank Securities Act. The incentives used to be a whistleblower could get up to $150,000 if it reported money laundering to the US government. Now, what a whistleblower could recover has been increased to 30% of anything the government recovers over $1 million. So a whistleblower who tells the government about money laundering and the government then issues a penalty of $2 million, the whistleblower can receive up to $600,000 in that case, which is significant. It used to be that the US Treasury could pay the whistleblower something. Now it's required to do so, although there is no minimum. It's a maximum, but there is no minimum. Also, the laws specifically protect whistleblowers from their own companies. So a company employee who blows the whistle to the government cannot be fired if they're in the United States, or there are potentially severe consequences for the company. So again, they're trying to, if somebody sees something, a private citizen, an employee sees wrongdoing, specifically corruption, they can do something about it, and the government can then step in and intervene.
Yes, thank you, Chet. Wonderful. There is this famous whistleblower, I think it's Birkenfeld, his name. He was an executive of the UBS, at that point, the largest bank investment bank, and he made $100 million in his whistleblowing. He spent, I think, about 1 year in prison, and then
I have an account at UBS, so I hope he didn't take that money. But okay.
Oh, sorry.
I said I have an account at UBS. I hope he didn't get my money.
Oh, yes, you probably would already notice if they did. Okay. So now, Sergio, what is the role of the private sector in Latin America in the anti-corruption landscape?
I would say a major role, as we are talking before, although we have a lot of progress with the Operation Car Wash, it's unfortunately we had some setbacks recently in Latin America. But anyway, I believe a great part of the private sector in Latin America awake for the importance of anti-corruption and compliance programs. And in an environment where you have some deficiencies at the level of the law enforcement against corruption, I believe then the private sector has much more responsibility. It's as it was also answered before, it's important for the business, it's good for the business. It's a way that private companies could protect themselves, not only against risks of being prosecuted or suffering a litigation in the local jurisdiction or abroad. We saw some cases during the car wash operation and even before, especially related with the application of the FCPA. But it's a way that the companies could protect them against fraud and promote between them a fair competition. Because usually bribery and corruption is related with some form of taking advantage in the market against your competitors. So in certain way, the fight against corruption is has also this goal of promoting fair competition. And doing the right thing is always the best way to do business. And in certain way, the companies doing that, they could also promote a better environment for all the citizens of all the country. It's good for the rule of law, and it's good for the business. So it's a major role, and even more important in countries with deficiencies in the law enforcement than maybe in other countries that have more efficient enforcement of the law.
All right, thank you, Sergio. Patricia, you are part of the Culture of Integrity group of the UN Global Compact. So can you expand on what culture of integrity means?
Yes, very much so. That's a topic that I really love. You know, those are big words. So let me start with one of the basic things, one of the basic elements of any compliance program is, as everybody says, it is in all manuals, tone at the top, right? What does that mean? It means that the leadership team needs to be engaged, and they should be communicating about what's expected of the employees and how they should behave, etc. Spreading the word in terms of the internal policies and the laws where the company operates. But that may not be enough. People have to actually look at them as an example. So it's not just a matter of talking about doing the right thing, it's actually doing it in day-to-day issues, in day-to-day practice. And the situations, as the society gets more and more complex with technology also, the problems get more complex. And at a very fast-paced environment where we're at, with a lot of competition, all the companies, are going through a lot of changes. Decisions have to be made in an instant, at the same time. So there's not enough time to actually consult different departments on every decision the employees take for the company. So it has to do with all these new ethical dilemmas that are out there. Employees have to be empowered to deal with them, to understand what constitutes an ethical decision. And in a study group that we discussed that an ethical decision is not necessarily, depending on the complexity of it, there is no one single right answer. So an ethical decision is a decision that takes into account all the different stakeholders that are impacted by that decision, even the ones that nobody thinks of, minority groups and things of that sort. So the tone at the top, it starts with tone at the top, but the executives need to talk about what it means to do the right thing in the company. And there's one aspect, which is the new ethical dilemmas that society faces and we face all the time. And also on the other side from tone at the top is engagement and inspiration. The idea of culture of integrity, those big words, as we studied that in the Global Compact of the United Nations, is actually how can the management team and all the company, prepare its programs, any company, and it could be even any institution, even a public institution could do that. How can they design their communication, their actions, their compliance program to inspire people, to motivate good behavior? If we do that, we have to work with, we have to understand human behavior and how do people react, especially in group, to use that peer pressure to generate good behavior that is expected. So understanding how people react and what motivates people is part of understanding how to create a culture of integrity. And if you get that right, through communication and programs, if you get that right, that goes far beyond the institution where it's applied. It goes to the actual lives of each employee, because it's one person, right? If that person starts thinking of what does it mean to do the right thing, they're gonna start thinking about their private lives also. So it expands this culture of integrity, as we studied that at the United Nations, is how can we actually engage everybody in that concept of doing the right thing, acting with integrity, where you have accountability on one side. If you do, because not everybody's going to do it right all the time, right? We're humans, so we make mistakes. So if we make a mistake, that's fine. Let's face it. Let's recognize it. And at the same time, let's promote good behavior, recognize good behavior publicly. That's also a very good incentive. So accountability and recognition, I think, helps a lot in creating that culture of integrity.
Oh, thank you, Patricia. I want to stick with you because, yes, this tone of the top is really a big deal. Every compliance manual talks about tone at the top being one of the key factors for an effective compliance program. So you probably answer a little bit this question, but I'd like to know what's the role of the management team in fighting in the fight against corruption specifically, and how to make it effective in such a unprecedented times as we've been living since 2020, since the pandemic broke.
Yes. So as I was saying, it's not just fighting corruption, right? You have to think, in my view, you have to expand that to creating an environment where people understand what is expected of them, and they act as owners, identifying and mitigating the risks that they take. Because each employee have to understand that they face individually, they also face risks. So for them individually, it's a good thing to actually follow the internal policies, etc., because they are protecting themselves, right? If anybody questions what they do, they will have, a documentation to justify what they did. So it's not just a matter of doing the right thing, but also documenting that you did the right thing. And as complexity evolves, document as you're not going to have one single right answer. Documenting the decision-making process is really important to make sure that we understood everything that is at stake when that decision was taken. We used to say the three P's of compliance: perception, process. So it's a perception, process. I forgot about the third one, but that's the idea. If anything comes out, what you did comes out and is questioned, you're going to be able to justify what you did and take the person through the process of doing that. And tone at the top, has to be not only at the top. It starts at the top, but usually where we see the biggest problems in private companies is the middle management. Because yes, the tone at the top exists, the right policies are in place, and all the boxes get checked. But once you go ask an individual employee, they may not be seeing their direct manager act in the same way that the executive leader acts. So that's why we understand that if you're able to effectively create this culture of integrity, it can permeate all aspects of the decision making of the company, and it's good business because it mitigates other types of risks also, not only corruption. Of course, for corruption, we do need to be very specific, targeting the people that deal with government officials, so that they understand the laws that are that regulate what they do in the countries that they do. But the idea is to create that environment where simply it's not accepted to do anything that could be seen as a bad decision. So it's not just about doing the right thing, it's showing and documenting that you did the right thing.
Oh, thank you, Patricia. And I think the ideal would be when this culture of integrity comes not only top down, because
yes,
it's been kind of a challenge in Latin America, especially in the public sector, and but come also bottom up, not only top down, but bottom up. So general spirit of culture of integrity.
And I do believe that if you make the program fun, compliance doesn't have, we usually don't use legalese when we speak to people. We actually use their own language, because in communication, you need to address people the way that they understand, right? We want the message to be received. So the idea is to actually speak in a very fun, very light way, and create very simple activities to engage them. So, there are a lot of initiatives that are really interesting. The private sector is actually acting in a very creative way to engage employees. We give out gifts. If they get something right, we give out gifts. We can run campaigns. Asking them to record a video with examples of what does it mean to do the right thing for them, examples of what they did in the company. So, and this way we can communicate that and incentivize others to do the same, because they're actually getting recognition because they did a video for the compliance campaign. I want to do too, and if I do it, I'll still receive a T-shirt, with the logo of the campaign on. Creating hashtags is something that people love also. So you can be very creative and do it in a very light, engaging way to motivate people.
Oh, sounds amazing. Sergio, your turn. How do you see anti-corruption compliance in the ESG movement? And for our audience, ESG is abbreviation for environmental, social, and governance.
We have now a strong movement on ESG. A lot of companies all around the world are now worried about being seen to do the right thing and doing the right thing on environment, on governance, and on social policies. And it's true that ESG is much more than anti-bribery or anti-corruption compliance. But I would say that anti-corruption compliance and anti-bribery does have a strong presence in any ESG program. For example, you cannot have a strong policy against illegal deforestation or a strong policy in favor of diversity, and at the same time you allow that bribes could be paid for public officials in your company. You will ruin your reputation, allowing this kind of illegal behavior. So you could use nowadays this ESG movement also to make the anti-corruption compliance, anti-bribery compliance stronger as a part of the core values of the ESG movement.
And talking about governance, and from your perspective, what are the minimum requirements for a comprehensive and effective anti-corruption compliance program?
You cannot use only a checklist, but for example, there are some basic rules. You need to have a channel that the employees or even all the employees or the managers could use to report wrongdoings. It's good that this channel also be available for suppliers, for stakeholders. You need to have a compliance officer. Depends on the size of the company, but it's for big companies, it's important to have someone dedicated only to this kind of work. This person need to have autonomy. This person need to have some protection against any kind of punishment or retaliation. You have to have in place some safeguards for those who decide to use the report channel. And the one part that's very important, as I said before, you need to have answer for each kind of incident that happen inside your company, because this is the main point. You have a prevention system. You want to avoid problems to appear, but sometimes they appear. There is no program that is perfect to avoid any kind of issue. And when the issue appear, it's important to know what you did about that. So that's the reason that I understand that you need to look for the details. And then you have a lot of other things around, for example, providing training for the employees, promoting a culture of integrity. There are a lot of things that need to be seen to evaluate compliance programs as a very good one.
Okay, thank you, Sergio. Now, Chad, you are a securities litigation and class action specialist. Can you enlighten us about the consequence of failed compliance programs in Latin America, please?
Sure, Fabiola. Failed compliance programs make my day. They also make the day of other plaintiff side attorneys. Why? Because failed compliance programs often lead to securities law violations. And in the United States, we can bring securities litigations against companies with failed compliance, companies who violate the securities laws. Very simply, a securities litigation, class action securities litigation, is an action to get money back for defrauded investors. What happens in these cases is a company makes false or misleading statements, such as it says, we're doing great, when the company is doing bad, or we just made $5 million in profits when they lost $5 million. Ultimately, when news about the truth comes out that in fact the company was doing very badly, the stock price of that company is going to go down, and that is going to cause losses to investors. So litigations can be brought in those circumstances. And the litigations are generally, they can be brought either by an individual, one investor or one institutional investor, or they can be brought as a class action where one individual can represent all investors in a company who were defrauded by false statements by the company. Now, how effective these actions have been is that plaintiffs filing US securities litigation class actions since 1996, when the law was changed, have recovered over $100 billion for investors. Not $100 million, $100 billion with a B. These are huge potential consequences. And a number of those companies who have been defendants were Latin American companies, most of whom had big compliance deficiencies in their programs. For example, a securities fraud litigation was brought in New York federal court on behalf of purchasers of the ADRs, or American Depository Receipts, and bonds of a Brazilian company, which Sergio, I think you've heard of. It's called Petrobras. And that action was initially brought by my law firm, working with a Brazilian law firm. The head of that Brazilian law firm is actually a former president of the IABA. But we brought a litigation against Petrobras, accusing it of, number one, putting out false financial statements. It inflated the value of its assets, specifically its property, plant, and equipment, its facilities, which it purchased for a lot of money and built for a lot of money, and they weren't worth anywhere near that amount of money. And also that they made false statements about the integrity of their management, which didn't have much integrity, and about the effectiveness of the financial controls, which weren't effective at all. The case was certified as a class action. And in January of 2018, Petrobras agreed to settle that class action by paying $2.95 billion US. 1 month later, PricewaterhouseCoopers, the auditor of Petrobras, paid another $50 million to settle the case, giving investors in Petrobras $3 billion in that one class action. Now, that class action only covered investors who purchased Petrobras securities on a US exchange or bonds that were offered in the US. If somebody purchased Petrobras securities over the Bovespa in Brazil, the native shares, they didn't get any compensation in that $3 billion lawsuit. However, companies have to worry about not only US class action litigations, but litigations in other countries as well. For example, those Petrobras purchasers over the Brazilian stock exchange have a class action pending now in the Netherlands. And that class action is potentially a lot bigger than the US class action. And on June 3rd of this year, my birthday, thank you very much, a motion to dismiss brought by Petrobras and the defendants, basically on the grounds that there was an arbitration clause that required any dispute to be arbitrated in Brazil, was rejected by the Netherlands court. They rejected that motion to dismiss. So the consequence from Petrobras and its corruption scandal has led to paying $3 billion in the civil litigation, paying billions of dollars to governments in Brazil and the United States, and now they have a potential even bigger class action against them pending in the Netherlands. And there's other countries as well. Now, Petrobras is not the only company that from Latin America that has been charged with FCPA violations, which ultimately were turned into securities class actions. For example, in addition to Petrobras, just in the last 4 years, there has been securities class actions, most of them which the company settled, against Odebrecht, Braskem, Electrobras, JBS, Banco Bradesco, Abengoa, and BRF. BRF just settled about a month ago for $40 million. And in case you think we're only going after Brazilian companies, not true. Another US securities class action case recently settled against the chemical mining company of Chile for $62.5 million. So the consequences for these failed compliance programs can be astronomical.
Yeah, it's the numbers are really impressive. So let's move to our next block about ethics and regulations. I have 2 questions. Our time is almost up, but Patricia, can you talk about trends you see in ethics and compliance to improve their effectiveness in the protection of company risks? And to what extent has your company, Uber, been implementing these innovative trends?
Okay, so one of the big trends that we see is actually data analytics, especially in companies that are data-driven, such as tech companies, and data analytics and machine learning. That's a big thing. So how can we actually use all the data that we have and develop algorithms to identify, potential transactions that present an added risk to the company, and then have a different workflow of approval for those types of operations. And that's just an example of what we can do. The big challenge for that is actually the source of data, because in order to do a good program in terms of machine learning and data analytics, you have to have good data. And data is spread, in every company I worked for, data is spread along different systems. So how can you actually gather all that information from the different sources, duly categorized? That's a challenge. That's a constant challenge. Duly categorized so that you can actually use to create statistical models. That's a big challenge and a big trend that most of the companies that are actually investing in effective compliance programs are going for. The other thing is, as I mentioned a little bit before, behavioral economics. So understanding human behavior and how can we actually use a lot of different studies that are being done, by great scientists and professors, at great universities. So just to name a few, Richard Thaler, is a Nobel Prize winner, and he talks about nudges and little incentives, things we can change in our procedures that drive good behavior or the expected behavior. Dan Ariely is another professor at Duke University. He does very, very interesting studies on how people behave. There's a very interesting show called Dishonesty. It was available on Netflix some time ago. I'm not sure if it still is, but if you can find it, it's a really, really interesting program talking about the experiments he does in terms of how people, how much people lie or not in their day-to-day lives. It's really interesting. So understanding, behavioral economics and trying to apply that to the programs to reduce friction, meaning less bureaucracy in the day-to-day operations. So you need to understand exactly how the operations work of the company, what is the business of the company, what are the control points, etc., in order to do to have your controls at the same time that you reduce friction for those that have to comply, that have to fill in forms and things like that. The idea is to have a lean process where there will be controls without people even realizing the controls are there. That's the state of the art of using behavioral economics for a compliance program. And the other thing, especially for multinational companies, companies that operate in very different regions such as ours, is actually having some flexibility to adapt the program to the local needs, to the local culture. Adapting the program is really key because, for instance, in global trainings, you're not going to mention the Brazilian anti-corruption law. And you need to mention that for the people that are here because they need to understand what the law says, right? In order to be able to comply. So adapting the global program to specific needs, that's very important. At the same time, having the same standard program that is applied all over the globe. It's not easy at all. And as you mentioned when you presented me, I also participate in the compliance committee of the American Chamber Association, and we were at a meeting this morning actually discussing that, how to localize compliance programs without losing that global nature. It's a challenge, but also one of the big trends that we see there. We also see the CGU, the organism, the Brazilian agency that studies and defines, a good, effective compliance program. They actually expressed 2 weeks ago in a conference. They expressed that it is very important from their perspective to have the local needs addressed to global programs. So let me just name those few.
Thank you, Patricia. Did you finish your answer?
Yes. Yes. No.
Oh, okay. So Sergio, the last question for you. Do you think Latin America requires new anti-corruption regulations, and which it will be?
Well, there is a long answer for this question. A long list.
We have only 7 minutes.
Problems to address, but I'll just give some small advices. Unfortunately, in Latin America, of course, in different levels, we still see sometimes a lack of independence or autonomy in the work of law enforcement agencies and also in the courts of justice. So this is a main problem that Latin America needed to address with, I'm not sure, judicial reform, the reform of the office of the public prosecutors, even problems sometimes with the police. That's an important point. To a more specific measure that I would also recommend, I believe that is whistleblower programs with rewards like the ones that you have here in United States work as a strong incentive to the private sector, not only to build effective compliance programs, but also to provide self-report about wrongdoing when issues appeared. That's something that we could work better in Latin America. We have, for example, in Brazil, some laws protecting the whistleblower in cases related to corruption, at least on the public sector. There is also a provision on the law about rewards for them, but it's not being enforced in practice because there is still some lack of regulation. So one specific measure that could be that could have a big difference in the anti-corruption movement was to create, regulate, and build a practice of whistleblower, not only with protection, but also with rewards.
Oh, thank you, Sergio. Yes, in fact, whistleblowing is something new here in Brazil, at least, and it was something that was enacted in our system. It stemmed from a project of law, your anti-crime package that you have approved when you were Minister of Justice in Brazil. And on the other hand, in the US, you have the roots of the whistleblowing program is a law made by your president, Abraham Lincoln. So it's something that you've been improving for a long, long time, and hopefully one day we'll be there as well.
Yes, so we have the provision at the law, at the bill that was approved during my term. It was not the bill that I totally liked, but this part was very good. But still, it's not being enforced. It's very strange.
Yes, and it needs regulation and needs to provisions to protect the whistleblower. I think we have a long way to walk. Okay, so I have this final question for all panelists, and in the past, slavery was considered a common practice. But today, we all agree that it was an abominable, repulsive practice. My question is, do you believe one day in the future, corruption will be like slavery is for us today? Patricia, do you want to start?
Yes, I could. It's a very difficult question, I guess. And, corruption is really harmful to society. It increases transaction costs. It is unfair, simply unfair. It increases the gap between rich and poor. It harms competition. It's really all bad. If you think about it, there is a small time, short-term gain to the companies that are involved, but with a very, very different outcome, as we can see, in the many examples that were mentioned here. So all the money that is spent in corruption, that is used in corruption, goes to the wrong hands, and that money could be used to improve the welfare of the population. So, the whole of society loses with corruption. So combating corruption should be an effort by everybody, not only the private sector, not only the public sector, everybody. It should be taught in schools. That's that would be my my suggestion and my hope, that we actually teach them in schools. Teach citizenship, so that people understand that we live in a society, so we have to think collectively, what is the society that we want to live in. So I don't know if it will be treated as such, but I hope so.
Thank you, Patricia. Chad, Sergio, who wants to jump in?
I would say that I also hope that we could change the way people think about corruption. I believe we had a lot of progress in the last 20 or 30 years, not only in Latin America, but all over the world. 30 years ago, it was acceptable to pay bribes at least in international commercial transactions. At least in some countries, allowed that you can use this as a kind of cost when you calculate your taxes. Now, I believe there is no country that allows this anymore. We have some NGO that are doing a great job, like, for example, the International Transparency, something really new in our history of corruption. But let's not forget that we have talks about corruption since the Greeks. Aristotle also wrote about corruption on his time, so it's not a new issue. But I as Patricia, I also have the hope that things will definitely change in time, and maybe we are seeing just the beginning of this change at this moment.
I'll try to be really quick. I'd say some people believe that when you die, you go to heaven. I believe in heaven, there won't be corruption. On earth, it's a little more dicey. I believe there are two fundamental parts of human nature. One is the thirst for power, ambition, and the thirst for money, greed. And they're very powerful. And I don't think they're going away anytime soon. And Sergio made the point, back in Aristotle's day, this was an issue. Now, I do more optimistically believe steps can be taken that corruption will be more the exception than the rule. So I think it can get minimized, but I think it's here for quite some time, and it's easily justified, unfortunately. On that happy note, back to you, Fabiola.
Americans are so pragmatic. Okay, hopefully, we will evolve to see corruption as we see now slavery. Okay, I'd like to thank our panelists for sharing their rich experiences and insights. I have enjoyed this interaction immensely. It was really a leading edge conversation. Once again, I'd like to thank the Inter-American Bar Association and thank you all for attending. Have a wonderful evening.
And thank you, Fabiola, for moderating. And I don't think
Yes.
anybody ever said that you're a federal judge in Rio.
Oh, thank you, Chad, for the
Thank you very
knowledge.
much.
Thank you
Thank
very much.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye
Thank
all.
you, Chet. And I just want to invite Chet. Well, I want to thank you all again. And I want to invite you and all our attendees to this event to the next panel, that is a panel, a panel on networking with the chambers. And it's going to, they're going to talk about legal certainty in doing business. So I would like to invite all of you, and I will ask our IT consultant that is listening, Charlie, to please, share the link in this chat. So if our panelists are interested in attending that event, they're welcome to do it. And also our attendees can do it through the regular links that they have received or through this chat. It's going to start at 5:30 in 11 minutes. And it's going to be really a nice program. It's going to start as a webinar format for the first part of the conversation. And then we're going to invite everyone to the room, and it's going to turn into a meeting format. So welcome everyone, and to our members who are attending and are through the camera, and also to our panelists who are here live with us. So thank you very much, and see you in the next program. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Charlie, pon en el chat el enlace, por favor. Gracias. Thank you, Chet. I look forward to seeing you there. Huh? Carlos Lopez, who's your panel, is moderating. So
Yes, I know. I saw that, so I have to attend to that.
yeah.
Thanks, Patricia. Thanks, Sergio,
Okay.
again.
Thank you very much.
Great.
Good luck.
Wonderful.
I'll not
Thank
be able
you.
to be in the next panel, but good luck for everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.